All right, today my guest is Lowell Wolff, photographer. And Lowell, before we started, we were talking about the concept of timing and being on time. So I wanted to ask you about timing as it related to photography. And, it's very important, is it not?
Very, very important.
So how does timing or the thought process behind timing affect your photography practice?
Well, I someday when I grow up, I'll probably pick one genre of photography and stick with it. But I think it's a little different for a different type of photography. Mm-hmm. One of the types that I like a lot is landscape photography. Usually the best times for those are the first couple hours after the sun rises and the first couple hours before the sun sets.
Okay. Isn't that the crepuscular time, or what they call that?
Yeah, they labeled them now a blue hour and a golden hour.
Oh, okay.
So the blue hour is when the sun is still below the horizon, but you get that blue cast, and the golden hour is just the sun is just barely above the horizon. So it depends on the mood and feel that you want.
Yeah.
When you ask about timing, the genre of photography that comes to mind is street photography.
Yep.
And that certainly is about capturing a moment that tells a story of some sort.
How does one go about, looking for those moments?
Well, in the case of street photography, the old adage is you can choose between hunting and fishing. You can either walk the streets and hope that you find something that's intriguing, or you can, like fishing, sit in one spot and wait for something to develop in terms of a story.
Yeah. What's your preference?
I'd rather be walking.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I don't have the patience to sit in a duck blind, for instance. So my friends can do that for hours at a time.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, but I just need to move a little more.
Or a deer stand.
Yeah, exactly.
And so street photography, that's usually done in an urban setting, right? More things going on. And so what kind of equipment do you take with you when you're going out to do some street photography?
It's a good point. I'll contrast that to the landscape photography. Street photography, you usually want a small camera so that you're not intruding into people's spaces.
Right.
And you're doing a lot of walking, so you don't need the extra weight. Whereas landscape photography, you're often in a car and you're transporting to a particular place. So you might have 25, 30 pounds of camera equipment on a backpack and a tripod and all that kind of equipment getting set up before the sunrise occurs.
Yeah. And for street photography, do you start out with like a map of the place that you're going to be shooting that day and then kind of walk a set route, or do you kind of just go wherever your legs take you?
Well, right now I have a collection in the armory, and that was a matter of, I called it Central Sunday. Every Sunday I would walk before the businesses opened up and just watch them open up.
Right.
And so you could kind of sense what their routine was like and what you expected to see. And you made sure you were in the right spot to capture that when it occurred.
And that was in a city in Mexico.
Correct.
Which city was that?
It's the pictures in that collection are within a 70-kilometer radius of Manzanillo, Mexico.
And where is that located?
It's if you can imagine the map of Mexico taking a dogleg to the right, it's right on the elbow.
Oh.
It is the largest
Pacific side then.
Yes, Pacific side. It's the largest container port in Mexico, so lots of ship traffic coming and going.
Oh.
Which was always a source of amusement.
Yeah. And you lived in that area for a while, right?
Yes, for 15 years, off and on.
Off and on. So you maintained a residence there? And
Correct.
Yeah. So I suppose during those 15 years you probably picked up a little Spanish and...
Very little.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when we got back here, there was not too many people that you could sit down and practice those skills with.
Right.
And we found that many of the people, at least in that part of Mexico, they didn't want you to speak Spanish. They wanted to learn English. But with body language, with inflections and so on, you communicate without the language.
Yeah. So what was the time frame that you lived there?
Oh boy, it would have been 15 years that we owned the condominium, and we sold it in 22. So it would have been, counting backwards from that, would be the time frame.
And what did you like about living in that town?
Well, there were a lot of things that we enjoyed about it. One of the things is it's a different way to accomplish everything that we just take for granted. And you see them accomplish the same task, and it may be much simpler, it may be different, but they get the job done. And discovering all those was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I suppose the nice weather didn't hurt either, right?
For sure.
Yeah. And when I think of Mexico, I always think of a place that's really rich in color and vibrant, and a lot of energy, within the cities and things like that. So in a way, it kind of makes it an ideal place to do this kind of street photography, right?
It is.
Yeah. When you're photographing, people on the street, what's your approach to? Do you have to ask them for permission to take their photograph, or do you kind of just take the tack? Well, hey, you're on the street; it's a public place. I'll just take whatever pictures I want.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that involves reading people very quickly, and how amenable they are.
Yeah.
Some areas, like for example, New York City, tripods are not allowed, and it's only because it's a tripping hazard.
Is that right? I didn't know that. Yeah.
That many people in that small a space, those come into play. Lots of areas of LA, you actually need a permit to shoot, even in public. In Mexico, there are very few laws that regard that. But again, you can kind of quickly read from body language and facial expressions whether people are open to have their photo taken or not. Of those times that I did ask, I was refused once. And it was a situation where there was, to me, it was a 3-generation picture. It was a mother, her daughter, and her daughter's baby. I asked if I could take the picture, and the daughter said no. So I said, gracias. I turned around and started to leave. She said, no. She opened up the blanket that was covering her baby. She wanted me to take a picture of the baby.
Only the baby, though.
Only the baby.
Okay. So what do you look for in a subject then when you're walking around? I mean, what are the kinds of things that strike your attention or strike your fancy, let's say?
It's one of the things I love about still photography is the ability to tell the story in a fraction of a second. Yeah. So a lot of times it's how much of the environment around this person do I include, exclude, to tell that story. Yeah. One of the photos in the collection at the Armory that gets the most attention is a photo of an elderly lady who is bringing a cup of water to 2 bronze statues. And as I learn more about her, she has dementia, but unlike the U.S., where she might be in a home of some sort, they just need to fend for themselves on the street. And she had made friends with those statues and was bringing them water.
So, I guess in that way, it creates a scenario, and then but does it require additional explanation to tell the story, or how does a photograph tell a story? Good
question. If you have to talk too much about the story, it didn't make it to the print.
Okay.
You'd hopefully like to tell the whole story just based on the image, without any memories that accompany it.
Yeah.
With that collection, over the years that we were there, I had thousands of images, and I found myself having difficulty separating the memories from what's on paper, to the point that I asked a friend to curate for me. Tell me which photos actually, the story made it to the paper.
Yeah. So when you're doing this, I mean, are you typically doing taking multiple shots of this? I mean, is it kind of like a rapid fire type of approach, or do you take your time before you snap the photo for each one?
I think you have to have enough time to, as I mentioned before, decide what you want to include and exclude in the frame. Sometimes if there's a lot of action, then you'll use a rapid fire approach, just hoping that one of the frames
turn out
captured what you wanted.
I don't know if you listened, but a couple of weeks ago we talked to Laura Grissamore, who you probably know.
Yep.
And we talked about that iconic image of Jack Ruby being shot from I think it was probably Life magazine or something like that, right? Yeah. And just how, there's no way that you would have been able to snap that photo at the exact right moment, but that must have been 20 shots, and but and how that process probably has changed significantly from the era of I guess whatever you want to call it, analog, developing the photos and going through that process of the darkroom, so like today where you can snap so many photographs. But do you, is your background in training in photography, are you trained in the old school methods of photography, or are you pretty much only doing digital photography?
Now I'm only doing digital.
Okay.
I got interested in photography and for 7 years did a Chamber of Commerce directory, which consisted of not quite like the directories that we have in Park Rapids area, but they were more focused on a theme that the Chamber would pick, for example, doors. And then they would ask me to go out and find doors of businesses that were most photogenic and do those. So I did 7 years of those.
Yeah.
That was on slide film for the most part because of its color and fidelity.
Sure.
I started, when digital started to come in and you started to see the 2 and 3 and 4 megapixel cameras, it was intriguing and you knew it was going to overtake film. But I didn't have the time with my job at the time to make that transition. So I made it a goal of retirement to complete that transition into digital and learn that world.
So you kind of just set that aside as a retirement goal.
Yes.
And you didn't work on it at all while you were still...
No. I did a couple publications for New Mexico Magazine, the Sodbuster that sits outside the Fargo Library was one that they were particularly interested in because Jimenez, the sculptor, was from New Mexico.
Yeah. So we talked about the kind of some of the street photography stuff, and I suppose you're waiting to see something that happens, or a particularly interesting person or event or something like that. Which of those? I mean, do you have any kind of memorable photos, either from the present exhibit or from others, that really jump out at you? So you mentioned the one with the woman in the cups and the bronze statues, but did you ever just chance upon an event where you thought to yourself, "Wow, this is really fortunate that I was here to be able to capture this"? Yeah.
Yes. Well, let's see. It's about 2 weeks ago. I just got back from a 3-day weekend in New York City that was all about photographing people and the architecture. And there was one that sticks in my mind that we were in Times Square at about 10:30 at night, and that's just wall-to-wall people and lights. And there was one young lady who had a hoodie, and she was watching her cell phone, and the light from her cell phone illuminated her face in the hoodie. And her cell phone was pink, the table beside her was pink, and that was...
And the light was blue, or what?
Yeah. And so brought a different color balance to her face. But that was one where the irony of having a moment of solitude and peace in the middle of Times Square was just pretty hard to resist.
Yeah. I always used to like to take pictures when I lived in New York at down in kind of, well, I used to live in the Lower East Side.
Okay.
And there, I think you're calling it the blue hour, sort of like right between like the hours of like 4 and 5 and stuff like that, where the light is just perfect to capture some of those reds and stuff that they have in those old buildings and everything. Like, so, did you talk a little bit more about what you were shooting out in New York for that 3-day weekend?
Okay. Well, some of it was, part of it was a workshop with Phil Penman, who's arguably one of the best street photographers in the world.
Okay.
He's British born. He lives in New York, but frequently goes to Europe for some of the major cities there. And we started out with many of the shots along 42nd Avenue, or 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. And some of those were serendipitous. I think one of the most exciting parts was there was one gentleman there from Switzerland who had come over. He was a design engineer for Otis Elevators. And he was telling me about their latest technology an express elevator that will get you up many stories in fractions of a second without you feeling that excess weight and so on. So near the end of the experience, there was only about 4 or 5 of us left, and we went to something called the Summit on Vanderbilt 1. And it's a 94-story building to which is the last 4 stories are all glass and mirrors. And so you see the people below you, the floors below you, you see the people above you. The day we were there was fog, so intermittently the fog would clear and you'd see the Empire State Building, and it would close in again and you'd see only the people. And the contrast of seeing the architecture, then the people, then the architecture was pretty amazing.
So you pretty much stuck to the Midtown area then? And okay.
We did spend some time on the Staten Island Ferry and Central Park. And so it's
a lot to do in 3 days. I mean, it's a huge,
The first day we walked a little over 7.5 miles.
Wow,
But it was worth it, very worth it.
Okay, so I was calling it outdoor photography, but you called it something else, landscape photography? Yeah. So I've seen a lot of your photographs, I guess, over the years, because you've been a member of our Rotary Club and have done various presentations, and I've just kind of seen stuff over at the Armory. You do like to shoot the North Shore, and I recall one of your, I think, collections was shooting it in the wintertime.
Right.
Yeah. So what goes into your thought process when it comes to planning a shoot? How do you choose the location? And, talk a little bit about, shooting something as difficult as the North Shore in the wintertime.
That's quite a process. And again, very worth it, but it does require some preparation. Spotting, identifying the spots ahead of time. I've done quite a few workshops up there with various photographers that live in that area. And part of what you get from those workshops are a pretty good overview of good sites, good photographic sites. So the winter workshops, it was one of the years where we stayed here, didn't go south at all. And the workshop leader basically prepared you pretty well for, here's the clothes that I'm recommending. Here's the boots I'm recommending. Here's the backpack.
Dressing in layers, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there were a couple of smaller skills that you needed to master before you started out. He let you know that, we're going to be arriving at these spots in the dark. So learn to walk around with a headlight, preferably with the red beam, so that you're not getting in other people's photograph. You'd need to get out of the car, put on your 25 to 30 pounds of backpack camera gear, get in the snowshoes. That alone was, I found myself as a turtle on the back many times before you mastered that. And then you carry crampons. And so in the morning you get up, you go to the spot, you get your gear on, you walk to the woods, and the snowshoes are necessary to get you through the woods. Then when you get to the shorelines, you dump the snowshoes and you put on crampons because that's needed to navigate the ice-covered rocks.
And those are, for those who don't know, those are the little kind of spikes that attach to the boot, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The ones we use are just about an inch long, and if you get the kind that are used for ice climbing, they also have spikes that come out to the front, so you can do a toe hold into the waterfall that's frozen and get your way up the waterfall.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, when you first do that and you start to walk out on the ice, I mean, were you apprehensive about that at all, or did you become comfortable with it over time?
Over time, you become comfortable, but never overly comfortable to the point of taking foolish risks.
Yeah.
To me, it was amazing. The first shoot I was on was at the end of January, and there's open water almost right to the shore. So the ice you're walking on is ice-covered rocks.
Right.
I went back.
Slick. Yeah.
Very slick.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the shape of the rocks is also a challenge to stay on top, not on the sides. I went back within a month, and the ice had built up around the very same thing that we had been photographing early to 20 to 30 feet high.
Wow.
So it's a very unique ecosystem that's just constantly changing.
Yeah. And what does the cold temperature do to the shot? I mean, you know, like, is there a distinct difference in the look of a photograph if it's taken at like 10 degrees versus 80 degrees?
I don't know that there is in the image itself. Certainly the light is very different.
Right.
You know, with the lower sun in the winter and the higher sun in the summer, that sort of thing. You can never get the exact angle you're hoping for, it seems, but you learn to adapt.
And do the landscape images also tell stories, or what is the, you know, do they convey emotions, or what's the artistic benefit of a landscape photograph?
Well, I think the landscape. Let me back up a little bit. You know, it's there used to be, you mentioned Life and Look magazines. In that era, there were photojournalists that some were artists.
Right.
Now that's all changed with the cell phone. I was doing some research the other night on Google. How many pictures are generated in a day? How many videos are generated in a day? The answer was 720,000 hours of video every day are generated.
Wow.
And still pictures are 61,000 per second. So with that deluge of images, I'll be honest, not very many of them are terribly artistic.
Right. So what makes one artistic?
Well, there's a shot of Gooseberry Falls that I like. When we first got there, I mean, it's one of the most photographed waterfalls on the North Shore by far. I grabbed my cell phone, took a picture of it, and then stood back and said, okay, now what would make this more artistic? Well, first step was if I could control the shutter speed to get down to a second and a second and a half, instead of seeing droplets of water, I'd be seeing the flow.
Right. That
was very endemic to that. If any longer than that, it looks like a sheet of plastic.
Sure.
Running on. Second thing was, okay, when I was there, it was in the springtime, there were cedar droppings that happened to be the same color as the iron ore in the water. So now you get repeating patterns and repeating colors throughout the image. So it's looking for details like that really make it rather exceptional.
So things that will sort of draw it together, and
yes.
So you know, so the viewer doesn't just, because you know, you can see somebody looking at a brochure or something like "Come to the North Shore" and they look, oh, there's a picture of a waterfall. There's something, you know.
Yes.
What are the qualities of a photograph like what you're talking about that make it something more than just a picture of a waterfall?
Over the years, and in following brain research, I think we know that there are certain characteristics that are present in visual arts, whether it be painting or photography or anything in between. Your eyes are drawn to brighter light sources. Warm colors are soothing, cold colors are a bit jarring. Leading lines are very important. I did
What did you call it? Bleeding lines?
leading.
Oh, leading lines. Okay.
Lines
What is that?
take you to a certain visual place. Not long ago, I did a class for some DAC clients, and lines is one of the things that they quickly grasp to. We gave them examples of here's a leading line that takes you to what's the primary subject of the picture. And they quickly grasped that. We went to the sculpture park by the bridge,
Yep.
and immediately the clients started seeing the crisscross of the arms, and then they started getting down, sitting on the ground, and crisscrossing their legs to match that pattern, and drawing them together.
Okay. So some symmetry or some things that kind of tie it together and
Repeating patterns, repeating colors, all these things can be used in an artistic way.
yeah, and so I guess a lot of that would come into play when you're figuring out exactly where you're going to set up your tripod too, right? I mean,
Exactly.
to try to find those things and.
Yep.
You know, I suppose that over time you kind of develop a knack for it to say, okay, well, I know I need to set up here, or I need to set up there, and then of course you've got the light and the time and all that stuff to. So you know, when it all comes together perfectly, you have your image, right?
Right.
And then you take probably several of them.
Right.
How do you go about selecting between the different images?
That's a process I hate.
Yeah.
I usually have to, like with the New York trip, set them all aside for a couple days and then go back to them and let your memory fade of what they were about, and then go back and artistically decide.
So that's probably part of the art of it too, then, right? Is to be able to actually choose between images and say, no, it's this one.
Yes.
And why, maybe you couldn't even articulate why you like that one better than another one, or maybe you could.
I think some of the selection process is entirely intuitive. The reason to set them aside for a while is, now that I haven't seen them for 2 or 3 days, which ones stick in my mind? And those are usually ones that are quite artistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was not long ago at the Badlands National Park, and for 6 days. And the first few days, I was at a loss as to why this area was so interesting. Then probably midweek, I discovered that for me, what was interesting was the shapes of the sedimentary objects were all very dramatic. But the colors were very subdued and quiet.
Yeah, white kind of.
Yeah. Grays, pinks.
Yeah.
So, well, what kind of sun angle goes with that? And the answer is, while the sun is still below the horizon, you get that nice soft glow.
So in the morning, the blue hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and then once you've captured it, now you can go through all sorts of film simulations of what film back in film days
Right.
did the best with revealing soft colors. And then you can start processing from there.
But now in the digital age, what kinds of settings are you thinking about, you know, as a substitute for the different films that, you know, like what's the modern day equivalent of that film selection process?
Actually, one of the reasons I use the brand cameras that I do is I shoot in RAW, which means it only takes the computer data from the sensor with no processing at all.
Yeah.
And then I can select which film simulations I want to start with.
Okay. So they're like filters almost in a way that
Yes,
go on there.
or presets.
Or presets. So that gets done after the fact.
After the fact, as does cropping. One of the things we know from brain research is if I show you a picture of a rectangle that's rectangular in framing, your eyes will naturally want to work their way through that image. If I show you a square image that's equilateral on all sides, your eye will focus in the middle. And knowing that, you could then use that as part of your artistic principle to construct the image that you're looking to create.
Would you say you spend as much time taking the photos as I mean, like, what's the balance of time, like the getting it set up, getting all your planning done versus actually shooting versus all the post-shooting stuff?
Well, the image that you shoot might take 120th of a second.
Yeah.
But being in the right place at the right time, that takes a lot more planning. There are some tools. One that I use a lot is called photo pills. It was actually developed in Scotland, I believe, that it takes Google Maps, and then it takes information about the sun angles and position and so on, and you can combine them with an augmented reality. So, for an example, it was a place that was little known a few years ago called the Black Beach. It's actually taconite tailings near Silver Bay. And I was staying in Tofty at the time, and I said, I want a sunrise shot, and I want to make it a starburst. You've seen those with the sun. It seems to have arms coming out of it. So I said, I want that on the Black Beach, so I can take photo pills and I can drop a pin on the map, and it will show me that I need to be there, for example, at 6:04 tomorrow morning. The sun will be at this angle, and it will show me exactly where I need to be to get that sun.
And then how do you use like Onyx or something, or how do you get to exactly the spot that it's calling for you to be
It will give you the latitude and longitude.
Okay.
And of where you drop the pin.
Yeah. Okay, and so is it pretty exact when you use Google Maps to get you there?
Yep, within 2 or 3 feet.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great tool. Photo pill?
Photo pills, yes.
Photo pills, okay. And is that a free program, or is that something that you got to pay for? Yeah.
It actually is free.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So if people wanted to take photographs on their vacations and stuff, they could do a little bit of planning by using that program, right?
Not many people will take the time to research it that carefully, but for example, around here, one of the places that I'm curious about is the headwaters.
Yeah.
So now I have a pin drop there, and at any point I can say, okay, today is November 15th, where will the sun come up tomorrow in relation to the headwaters?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe a bad day, maybe a good day, but this will give you a pretty good indication of what you'll see.
What are some of your favorite areas to photograph in let's just say the Park Rapids area, 100-mile radius? Yeah.
We moved to Park Rapids because my professional career was in Fargo.
Right.
And as we started moving towards Detroit Lakes, that held little attraction to us because it seemed like it was the same people who we saw all week just transplanted to Detroit Lakes. So we kept moving further east.
Yeah.
And when we got to Park Rapids, we realized that this is where the tree mix started turning more towards conifers and away from deciduous trees.
Yeah.
And that was a big aha for us.
Yeah.
And we realized that that's where we wanted to be.
So the edge of the boreal forest or something
exactly.
Like that? Yeah.
Yep.
And then Detroit Lakes is still more kind of the prairie, right?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Over there. Do you have a particular, place that you think is particularly scenic for photography around here that you like to shoot, or?
I'm open to almost anything. One of the shots that most people find quite interesting is a picture of a lawn chair on a big mound.
Yeah.
And many people say, oh, were you in the desert somewhere? No, this is a gravel pit just north of Dorset.
Yeah.
It's keeping your eyes open, and I'd spotted that actually driving on County 18. There was somebody that was working out, running over the peaks of these gravel piles.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And I thought, whoa, this is kind of interesting. So when I spotted the chair, I also realized that the only thing that is going to make that picture really pop is the clouds in the sky. So it's file it away. And then one day when the clouds got all big and fluffy and like cotton balls, grab your camera and get to that spot.
Yeah. I used to live right on, when I first moved to town, Fairway Drive is just like right across from that gravel pit.
Yeah.
And I used to think sometimes when you're looking out at that thing, it almost looked like Egypt in a way.
Yeah.
But it's, so I like that, the idea of just, having an eye for things that might be interesting like that. I mean, that's what a photographer has to have, right?
Right.
To find interesting things in pretty much any situation or scenario.
Yep.
Yeah. What are some of the, more difficult situations that you've had when you're, like, let's say you've been on a planned shoot, whether it be combative people or the weather not cooperating with you or errors or malfunctions in your equipment, some of those.
I've been very fortunate not to have too many negative experiences about that. I did get punked, if you want to call it that, one time in Mexico.
Okay.
There are always people that are looking to get your money or get your ID or whatever. Mm-hmm. But you learn how to deal with those factors.
Yeah.
You keep little ID on you,
mm-hmm.
mostly cash.
Mm-hmm.
You dress appropriately,
mm-hmm.
always a crossbody sling bag so that
no
one can just grab it and run
mm-hmm.
off.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for the Cass County, North Dakota Sheriff's Office for a while.
I saw that there, yeah.
And that
mm-hmm.
helps a lot in terms of just situational awareness.
Sure,
Keeping yourself aware.
Yeah.
Weather, I don't know that there's bad weather.
Yeah.
You adapt.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah. It's if it's raining, great. You've got puddles all over.
Yeah.
Puddles reflect your surroundings.
Uh-huh.
So it was 2 days of rain when we were in New York City.
Yeah.
But I have lots of pictures of the Empire State Building reflected in a puddle.
Right.
And framed with dry ground. Winter, it's kind of interesting because the camera manufacturers don't test their equipment. They just guarantee that you can shoot, in one case, they'll guarantee you can shoot in 14 degrees above zero.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's not very helpful in this part of the country.
No.
But you realize that that's just, they haven't tested it any colder.
Mm-hmm.
But you learn in the wintertime, for instance, when it's extremely cold, you wear batteries that are close to your body so you keep them warm.
Yeah.
Because they'll drain very quickly.
Yeah. Anybody who's ever tried to go on a hike or a walk or something or a run in the wintertime holding a cell phone in their hand knows how quickly the battery drains out.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Same thing we're facing with electric cars right now.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, they have a 400-mile range, but not in the winter.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that you had worked as a reserve deputy at the Cass County Sheriff's Office,
yes.
and then I also saw from some of the papers that you had shared with me that you'd done some emergency planning work.
Right.
Yeah. So, did you do that in the context of working in in the schools in Fargo, and did you become an expert on that subject as well?
I remember our offices were within a block of Merit Care, what at the time was Merit Care, now Sanford Health. And it happened about the time that the Red Lake School shooting happened,
mm-hmm.
which was one of the earlier ones.
Yeah.
And we listened to the helicopters bring kids in to be helped via surgery.
Sure.
And it just coincident that we would meet monthly with the mayor of Fargo, school district and the park district, and we had a lot of projects that we could do more efficiently if we all knew what the other person was doing
mm-hmm.
and sort of work together. And at that point the mayor said, are we ready for something like this? And
mm-hmm.
we weren't.
Yeah.
So my responsibility at the time was communication and planning. And
you working for the Fargo School District, right?
Correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so the superintendent at the time had actually been in a cafeteria where there was a school shooting in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew how disruptive this could be. And he said,
mm-hmm.
this is part of planning, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he said, yes, sir.
Yeah.
And so during that process, the first thing I did was call the police chief and the fire chief and the ambulance service and say, I just got this assignment. I need to know how you guys respond and why you respond the way you do. So any training you can provide over the summer that you're giving to your employees, I'd like to at least participate. And I did that for a couple of years, and through that, I ended up having taken what needed to be taken for qualifications for a deputy sheriff.
Okay.
And that was very helpful in many ways. In education, we have certain student records that cannot be legally released to the public. Law enforcement has similar records. So in the case of a school safety issue, being a deputy sheriff and being a school administrator, I had access to both.
Yeah.
While I couldn't share them, I could tell the superintendent, if you knew what I knew about this, you probably wouldn't decide in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. So, did you conduct seminars on, to I guess, the school safety officials and students and things like that about like what to do during a live shooter event or that kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We had school resource officers at the time, so I became a school resource officer as well.
Yeah.
And so there were 6 of us throughout the district. We developed our plan, and then we realized we had the Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, said, what are you guys doing, and can we get in on this? And we were doing a day-long training just with new teachers seminar. And by the time we finished, we had basically taken the plan and adopted it to the 28 school districts in Cass and Clay counties.
Okay.
And they basically formed their plans around us. We had mutual aid agreements with all of those districts, so that in the case of a school shooting, for example, if we have to evacuate a building, we know we don't have enough buses. So the mutual aid agreement said that school districts around us agreed they would contribute whatever resources they could. And likewise, we would contribute our resources to them. We realized that because the incidents we have, it wasn't just Fargo police that was showing up. It was ATF, it was FBI, it was Secret Service, it was Clay County deputies. I mean, this is a community that they're used to combining their resources like that.
Yeah, right. So, and I think the fact that you've got one person, like in your situation, who's got access to both the police and the school records is crucial, right?
Yes,
I mean, to sort of be a liaison, not sharing the information, obviously, back and forth, but to be able to make recommendations informed by all of the information. Because what I see, like when I read about one of these, it's usually like there were all these warning signs and red flags and that there was something maybe not right with this particular person, but then it just seems like nobody was told, or if they took action, it wasn't severe, it wasn't a strong enough action, at the time. And I can't help but think that a lot of that is just because of lack of information, or the wrong, the right person didn't get the right information at the right time.
Yeah. When George Bush visited Fargo some years back, and the police department, of course, is expected, along with the sheriff's department, to augment the security that the Secret Service does. So as a favor for that, they said, we'll bring in whatever workshop you think would be of help to your community. And we selected the Secret Service because they're very good at threat assessment, or were.
Yeah, I don't know about that so much these days, but yeah.
And that helped an awful lot because we learned some of their techniques. For instance, a bomb scare written in first person is much different than a bomb scare written in third person. And you start paying attention to things like that that they've learned over the years.
Yeah, institutional knowledge.
Yes.
Right, that could be shared. Well, I want to shift gears again and talk a little bit about music. I saw that you a lot of your education and background was in music, and that you were a clarinet player for many years, and then unfortunately you can't play clarinet anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, being someone of, I'm an amateur piano player myself, and I know that music is really helpful. to just sort of my day-to-day living, and it's just a great part of my life. I can't think. I mean, if all of a sudden I just wasn't able to do that anymore, what kind of an impact that would have.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about what that meant to you to kind of not be able to do that anymore, and sort of how you responded to that?
It was actually a medical condition that came about where I didn't realize it at the time, but I had a brachial cleft that turned malignant when I was 4 months old.
Oh.
And so in the operation to remove it, the left half of my tongue became paralyzed. A nerve was cut.
Yeah.
I didn't know that until I was in college.
Yeah.
And it was actually during the Vietnam era, and I flunked the physical because the physician was wise enough to figure out that I had half of a paired sense was already gone. And so they don't take you in the military because if the other half went, it would be total disability.
I see.
So I knew this when I was 21, but I wasn't ready to admit that at some point with the articulation on the wind instrument,
right,
I was not going to be able to do that.
Very difficult, right? Yeah,
yes.
With the clarinet especially.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I turned my interest to somewhere else. I did one last recital.
Yeah.
And then then basically turned my interest to, at that time, computers.
Yeah. Clarinet's I always think of it as being just a nerve-wracking type of instrument because it's very unforgiving, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is.
Because it's so easy to, if you change your mouth position or embouchure on it ever so slightly, it can result in a squeak or something of that nature, right? But I suppose over time you train the muscles and you're able to sort of master that. But when you did play, what did you really enjoy about it?
That's hard to say. I was probably a geek before the term geek was popular. I remember in middle school, Mom and Dad would ask you what you wanted for Christmas, and I said either a box set of Beethoven 9th symphonies or Bach Mass in B minor. That's pretty geeky.
Yeah, I think so, but hey, great, right.
And it was, again, I came from a musical family, and at that time Columbia Records had a club, and every month they would send you a record with snippets of different classical music. And so I basically grew up with that environment. And as you mentioned, it's a stress reliever. It's an art form that is wonderful, I think. And that doesn't, even though I can't play, it doesn't prohibit me from listening much more intensely.
So what are some of your favorites music-wise that you like to listen to then?
I'm liking, classics, a lot of the classics. I also got interested in college and jazz and pursued that for a while. As a matter of fact, I thought at one point that may be an avenue I'd like to pursue.
Wasn't Benny Goodman? Wasn't he the clarinet player?
I'm not quite that age.
Okay. Well, neither am I. I mean, the guy is, right? So
during one of the summers in college, I joined the Musicians Union out of Omaha, and we would travel with pickup bands that would go to state fairs.
Yeah.
And I learned from that. It was a great gig. I mean, there was some of the big names were that you'd backup band. They bring their own piano, bass, and drums, and then you were the horn section that would reinforce that. But I learned that it's a pretty rough life.
Being a road musician?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, I remember one trumpet player that was, he was into drugs and alcohol, and he was pretty miserable. A great musician. So
many of them
but
were,
pretty miserable. Yeah. So I kind of checked that list. Nope, not going there.
Yeah, you didn't have that disposition.
No,
right? Yeah.
No.
All right, so let's, as we're wrapping up here, let's circle back to photography. So what are some of your current exhibits and your future plans? It's a journey. For me, it's a journey, a visual journey. And I'm interested in things that the camera can see that I can't.
So I did take one of my cameras and have it converted to infrared. So infrared light waves are something we can't see, but you can mix it with visible color and get some very interesting effects that way.
Okay.
So
what kind of subjects would you be shooting for that?
Actually, all kinds, but it's rather complicated to explain simply. But by filters that use more or less color, there's some that come out with just extreme contrast black and whites. And those work very well with, for example, an isolated tree with an interesting cloud formation, because the clouds get brilliantly white and the sky goes black. So on the other hand, you can use some that take more of the upper red spectrum and just get some very interesting people pictures, because the color is not the color you're wearing. It instead responds more to the dye that was used to get that color. So different brands of clothing can look quite different. Another one is, it's called ICM, or intentional camera movements.
Okay.
You leave the shutter open for 1, 2, 3 seconds, but you deliberately move the camera. And the camera becomes kind of like a brush. In its ability to become more abstract, blend colors together. Is
that more for portrait?
No, I think on my website now there's a couple different examples. One was when we were traveling in the South last winter, there was an arcade that had a lot of pinks and blues and a lot of different graphic images on the side. So I worked for quite a bit of time to blend some of those. If you look at the building and you look at the finished image, you'd be hard pressed to tell you where I was and what I did to do that. It's completely abstract in its finished product.
You mentioned your website. That's lowellwolff.com?
Well, it will be soon.
Okay.
Right now, it's called Yo Dreamcatcher Images.
Okay. How do you spell Y-O?
Y-O and then Dreamcatcher Images. If you Google Lowell Wolff photography, it will come up as well.
And that's Wolff with one F and one E, right?
It's Wolff. It's Lowell with 2 L's at the end.
Yep.
And Wolff with 2 F's at the end.
Oh, okay.
I've struggled all my life to figure out which ones are silent, but it makes no difference.
Okay, 2 L's and then 2 F's.
Yep.
Lowell Wolff. Okay. And then do you have a current exhibits going on now, I think, at the Armory, and then was there one in Detroit Lakes too coming up?
Yes. The Armory, that exhibit is of the Mexican street photography. It's called Connections, and it will be there to the end of this month.
Okay.
Part of the North Shore exhibit is right now in the city of Moorhead in their office complex.
That's Reflections on Northern Minnesota?
Correct.
Okay.
Then later connections will go to Detroit Lakes Library and the New York Mills Library. Okay.
And their prints and things like that, they're available for purchase on the website as well?
They are. That's not a primary push for me, but
no.
They are for sale.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, Lowell Wolff, thanks for taking the time today to come in and explain a little bit about what you do. I mean, there's so many other things that you do. It seems we, obviously didn't get to cover all the things, but I appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed the visit.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back. Thank you, Lowell.
Thank you.